So this video is going to cover how to put in sound and or a different decoder into your Athearn Sd60e. And from what I can see here, and I'm going to pull this apart here for the first time just as I'm doing it with you on camera, taking a look at the bottom of the model, it appears to be put together kind of the same way as an ace. There's a screw here and one here, and of course also one screw which will take out the coupler pockets, and that needs to be done on either end, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Also, when you're doing this, make sure that you have a foam cradle or some type of foam piece, because there's a lot of delicate parts here, such as the PTC, some railings, the horn, a couple little grab irons here, and you don't want to smash those. So don't do this on carpet or anything that's going to smash into the top of the locomotive, because you got to kind of put it on its lid here in order to access some of those things on the bottom. Also on the bottom, kind of hard to see, but there is a little sanding lines, and they're back here also. Want to be very gentle with this as you're taking it apart, because there is a lot of kind of little underbody parts here that are very delicate, so you don't want to really manhandle this thing here. So I'm going to go ahead and undo those two screws in the middle, and also undo the coupler pockets, and with any luck the shell should just pull right off from the top. So I went ahead and undid the coupler pockets on either end here, and also the two screws in the middle here. In order to get those off, you do also need to take off the fuel tank cover, which is just held on by one screw in the middle. Not a big deal there. So we're going to try to get the shell off now. Again, can't stress enough the importance of being gentle when you are taking this off. You want to use kind of the minimum amount of effort required to get it off of here. You can see the motor flywheels here. It's on there pretty good. There we go. So we got it. And okay, so it looks like they got big clumps of wires there going into the front and back. So we're going to go ahead and set this down here. I'm going to pause the camera real quick and kind of better secure this so that I don't drop it. So kind of secured things here and spent a couple minutes just kind of studying everything on here, and I'm going to show you a couple things that I found. So I did hear probably one of the bigger things here to talk about is I did see in some videos that this actually does have truck lighting, and you can kind of see it here, but these little yellow dots here are actually surface mount LEDs, and those are kind of wired into this big other clump of wires. And then as we take a look here on the factory light board, which is set up for the 21-pin decoder now, it does appear that there's 6 functions here and I believe 2 more right here. So for functions, you got ditch light 1, ditch light 2, 3 and 4, and then step lighting should be on the same, actually not step lighting, but the lighting there should be on another circuit. So 5, I'm guessing, on that, as far as outputs. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, this decoder might not have been the right choice, because I'm not sure that I have that many lighting outputs on here. So what I did go with was the select 21 pin. So select, actually I think they do have more lighting outputs on this. Well, the idea is, and hopefully what we're able to achieve, is that we get, of course, flashing front ditch lights, flashing in the rear, have the capability of using the lighting here for the trucks. And then, since it does appear the functions are individually wired, I shouldn't have to rewire. This should be a plug-and-play installation, except for the speaker, which normally on the SD70s is right here. They actually have it on the opposite side right here. And I didn't look at it too much just yet, but I believe it's a 28mm speaker that's there. We'll go ahead and put the decoder in here and then flip things around and take a look at the speaker there. Got my decoder here, and the only leads that they have on there is for the speaker wire. It's pretty much, I'm going to pull off the bypass plug here. That is on there good. I'm going to pause it here and be a little bit more. So I've gone ahead and flipped it around here, got my new decoder on, and the speaker leads I did go ahead and wire up to a 28mm speaker, which is indeed the right one. And the one that I'm using is actually an ESU speaker. And come on. So 50333, it's a 4-ohm speaker. You can use any 28mm speaker here. I'm choosing to use these just because I have a bunch of them left over, and because they're 4-ohm, I can really only use them in either dual speaker installations or in ESU because they do support 4-ohm. I have a bunch of them. A couple of them are bad, so I'm not sure. I'm hoping this is one of the good ones. So as soon as I get off camera here, before I put all this back together, I'm going to go ahead and make sure it's the one of the working ones. You don't want to go ahead and put all this together and then not have a speaker work. So I would suggest testing it before you do put it all back together. So a couple other things of note here. In the speaker enclosure area, I guess you could call it, they had this cover, but it's actually not just a cover. It's basically a solid weight. And so what they did was, they figured, well, it's a non-sound unit, we might as well pack some extra weight in there. So they just turned that entire area into a solid weight. And the screws that are in here actually can be reused. So you take them out of their original locations, which are in the inside there, and then you can move them to the outside points to actually retain the speaker. So it's kind of a nice little thing there. You can use some existing parts. I mean, you won't really do anything with this afterwards, but instead of just screwing it in there, I'm probably going to put in a little bit of microcrystal clear to kind of make a little bit of a gasket for that so it doesn't rattle in there. I don't think that it will anyway, but I'm going to go ahead and do that after I make sure that this speaker is the one that's working. And then we might be able to get into loading up the decoder here. So got my speaker in here, ran just a little bead around the front of the speaker with the microcrystal clear, and I'm just working on putting in the 2 retaining screws back in that came out of the center weight that was in there. And once that's in there, I'm also going to put a little strip of electrical tape, just a little square over the part of the speaker that sticks out. And the reason that I do that is for, should the shell rest on this, sometimes it can cause kind of like a resonance in the shell and just like kind of a rattle. So it kind of helps to muffle that a little bit. If you have like velvet tape or some kind of like fabric tape, that actually works even better. I don't have that, so I'm just using the electrical tape, and hopefully there's no shell rattle, but we'll figure that part out here in the next part. So I think once this can all go back together again, pretty much we can put on the shell. I'm not going to tighten anything down just in case I need to change any function wires or reference something, or maybe something isn't connected and I need to get back in there. I don't want to have to take apart the whole shell again. So I'm just going to kind of lay it on top and mostly secure it in there, but make sure that you're not grabbing onto the top of the locomotive, because then it's going to fall out of there. So always make sure you're grabbing along the bottom, like on the sides of the motor, or maybe like on the fuel tank when you're handling it, just to make sure that you don't drop it. So that's it for this part. So one little update here on the speaker part here. The top screw was actually too long to go back in there. The bottom one actually does work, but with the glue that I have on there, I don't really think that it's going to be a problem. So just make sure that you do have something that secures that speaker in there, because otherwise it's just going to rattle around back and forth in there. So very, very important note here, for the speaker, do not use these screws that originally came with the weight here. What happens is if you screw in the lower one, you actually go right through your drive shaft. So don't do that. I was fortunate enough to have a spare one from one of my other Athearn locomotives and just kind of swapped it in there, but don't do that. Don't make the same mistake as me there. So just use some, very soft glue to put that speaker in there. Don't try to screw that in there unless you have screws that are shorter than this and have the same thread. So that is an option too, but you definitely don't want to use something that's too long because it literally went right through the drive shaft. So don't do that. Alright, so I've gone ahead and put everything back together on the model, at least fairly securely. And the next thing is we're going to want to program up this decoder. If you're not using a ESU decoder, you may not have to do this, or if someone's already sent you a pre-programmed one, then you may not have to do this either. Pre-programmed or not, I like to go over everything in my decoders. So the first thing is we need to find the Sd60e file that ESU has put up, which I know that they have, just not sure how recently. So I'll just have to find it here. Now I've heard that they're actually going to be doing an Athearn specific version of this file. The one that's up, I'm guessing, is not necessarily optimized for the model. But with the CV settings, we'll pretty much do that ourselves. There we go. There it is. So I'm going to download, and I have a select and we're going to save it. And it's a small file, so it's only a couple megabytes. And we'll go ahead and open it up. Oh, we have a new version. And it says that the file is corrupt. Well, I might have to actually update my software to run it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera here. So I went ahead and updated my software here, and now the file opens up just fine. So it's something that you may need to do as well. So the first things first here, we're going to go ahead and set our address to 911. I'm not going to worry about consist functions for right now. Or brake settings. I'm not a fan of momentum, so I kind of turn that off. Come on. Which is basically your CV3 and 4. This setting I turned down. You only really keep this up if you have a Keep Alive hooked up, which we do not in this case. So just kind of turn it down a little bit. And function mapping. This is going to be where there's going to be a lot of work needed. So I'm going to go through the trial and error. I'm going to let you know what I find there. So I'm not going to mess with that too much for right now. Flashing rate, that'll be another thing that I kind of have to dial in by looking at it. Again, I'll go through that and I will get back to you on what I find. And motor settings, don't really need to mess with that. Sound, not really going to worry about that right now either. So we will give a little preview of it here. So with any luck, our model will sound similar to that. And then I also need to verify things like the bell and the horn there. Those things are adjustable through CV48. And in the release notes for the file here, I believe it does give a description of those. So here we go. The default is a K5LA R24 for the horn. And there's an E-bell, the Graham White E-bell. And I'm pretty sure this is an E-bell since this is a fairly new locomotive rebuild. So I'm going to leave it with E-bell. And I'm going to leave it with that K5LA R24. So I don't really think I need to mess with CV48 at all. So I'm going to go back to my file here. First things first, we're going to do a write decoder data up top here. So this little guy I like to do first, and then once that's completed, then I will go ahead and load up the sound data, which is a much longer process that takes on average usually about 20-30 minutes to fully load up to there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on pause and do both of those steps, and then we're going to come back and see how that goes. Okay, so finished uploading all the files there and did figure out the kind of the function mapping with all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what I found and how I set it up. So taking a look at the functions here, just kind of going through them. I mean, you got your F1, which is your bell, your F2, which is your horn, 3 is coupler clank, F4 is the dynamic brake. I like to stick with F5 as the number boards, and those are actually set up on the decoder as aux number 3. And then for the reverse ditch lights, those are actually aux 5 and 6. And of course the front ditch lights are going to be aux 1 and 2, and aux number 4 is going to be your ground lights, which I set to F7. And then you got your other functions here. F8's your mute, F9 drive hold, independent brake on F10, F11 radiator fan, and F12 I set up as the dimmer. Typically I don't use more than 12 functions, but it does have a couple others that are in here. And then also when we go to the actual functions here, when you first download the file, it has aux 1 and 2 set up as ditch lights. Aux 3 and 4 it has set up as the rear ditch lights, but that's actually not the way that Athearn has it wired up. They have that on aux 5 and 6. So I just had to relabel these, and then also accordingly setting up the ditch lights, making sure you got your grade crossing logic on there, and on one of them having the alternate phase clicked on ground lights, and aux number 4 there, changing it from a ditch light type 1 light to a dimmable headlight. Same deal on the number boards. On these I selected ditch type 1. So all the functions are figured out there. I have the sounds that I want. Volume levels could probably be a little bit fine-tuned. The next thing is going to be having a brain fart here. Oh yes, the ditch light flash rate. So I'm going to take a look at some videos, and then I'm going to kind of like tinker around with that, and we'll match it up there, and then I'll find a number that works pretty good here. So I seem to have found a pretty good flash rate here. I'll go ahead and blast the horn. So that's pretty good. And we'll go ahead and look at what setting I actually use there. So I'm using 25 and 68 there. So for the pretty much the faster, the speed of the flash is here, and then this is how long after you hit the horn that it actually continues blinking. So I think that's it. We can kind of get into some of the details of it now. So there it is. Sound is now installed in this. All the LEDs work as they're supposed to. They're on the proper functions. All I have to do basically to secure this now is to put my fuel tank back on there. Also the screws in the middle first, then the fuel tank, and then the coupler pockets. And while I have the couplers out, I'm also going to switch those over to KDs. So that's it. Pretty relatively easy speaker install. Not really much else other than that. So I mean, really easy to do, and even easier, make sure that you get a decoder that supports 6 functions. That way you're going to be able to independently control some of these things like the number boards, the ground lights, also the ditch lights, having them flash front and rear. That uses up 4 functions alone there. So you need a 6-function decoder. And I think that's a lot of the reason that Athearn went to a 21-pin decoder style. So, not too bad.